I know, but
in
listen
3 years, they
But
drove
listen to me.
cars on the moon,
But that's not
played
what I'm
golf
saying.
on the moon.
But that's what I'm saying.
And yet, for some reason, today, they can only send mannequins to orbit the moon?
Well, listen, we're in agreement on this. That's all we're confirming.
That's why I'm confused.
But hold
too.
on, Jamie. Hold on, Jamie. So we're confirming, but
I'm
no,
gonna stop.
but hold on, Jamie. Don't stop.
But you guys are fighting against the things that I'm saying as a photographer, as a filmmaker, and like
We're not fighting
But you're
against
assuming
anything.
you're assuming it's sunlight.
I said it could be 4 different lights. It also could be the reflector of the actual lunar lander. That thing is made of giant shiny metal that has also light reflecting in multiple ways. I don't know. I'm getting more confused on all of these pieces because like I thought that they didn't even go to space.
No. Nobody thinks that. Nobody thinks that.
They did go to
Jamie,
space.
you need to catch the f*** up on
Bro.
Reddit.
Well, look at
Joe Rogan seems to be on a roll for the last couple of weeks. He's been mixing it up with guests from different backgrounds, covering different topics, and I don't know about you guys, but I'm all for it. It's reminiscent of the old JRE before the pandemic, where he'd have interesting guests on to talk about everything and anything. Just today, I saw he uploaded a podcast with pseudoscientist Christopher Dunn, which feels like an extension of the Dibble versus Hancock debate. But today I'm covering his recent episode with moon landing conspiracy theorist Bart Sibrel, who, like Graham Hancock, has known Rogan for years.
We first met, what was it, like at least 20 years ago, right?
22 years ago.
Was it 22? Mm-hmm. Wow. So I had seen your movie, and I don't even remember how I got in touch with you, because this is before my podcast. I don't even...
You emailed me.
Essentially, you're known worldwide as the leading proponent of the moon hoax theory. You're the guy who's researched it the most. You're the guy who can auto-recall the most information. And you're the guy that the people that believe the moon landing was real hate the most.
So similar to the Tucker Carlson episode recently, I left this episode of JRE feeling pretty disappointed. Even though I'm all for these kinds of conversations, Rogan's guests always seem to be light on actual evidence and rely on flaky strawman arguments to prove their points. Bart Sibrel isn't a scientist, he's more of a documentary filmmaker, pseudo-journalist whose whole career has basically relied on the moon landing hoax theory. He's kind of like a right-wing Michael Moore, and even though Joe didn't get an actual scientist on the podcast to debate Bart, I've got to give Rogan credit here. I think he did a really good job at pushing back on Bart's theories and representing the counter-argument.
Well, I'm going to have to steel man some of the arguments against you. You know, obviously. It's like people would say, if I was steel manning their position, I would say, no, we're not trying to do it today. If we wanted to do it today, we could do it today. But if I was going to steel man it, what I would say is, if I'm training these guys to film things, the only thing that I could say, if I was going to steel man it, would be what I said. I'm just steel manning it. It doesn't necessarily mean that the whole thing was fake. Now, to steel man their position, like it took so much money and so many resources that we don't have that would be better served going to other things. Okay, to steel man that, you would say, what was the chain of custody?
Why would they do that if they really went to the moon?
Okay, the steel man. I mean, I know this is annoying
You
to
mean
people.
steel man means devil's advocate? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I'm taking the other side's position.
Why?
Because it's interesting to see how it lines up.
Now, can I do
But the
devil's
flag blows.
advocate? What do you call it? Steel what?
Steel man.
Okay, but the reason why it's doing that.
So Joe Steelman Rogan actually knows quite a bit about all these theories of the moon landing hoax and various bits and pieces of so-called evidence that conspiracy theorists point out when making their arguments. And I don't think Bart expected that from Rogan. It seemed like he thought it was going to be a walk in the park and Joe wouldn't push back or challenge any of his assumptions, which, to be fair, Rogan is known for doing. He definitely picks his battles. And in the end, it got a little heated because Rogan kept pushing back on everything Bart would say, which led Rogan to get frustrated from all of Bart's straw man arguments, and then Jamie kept jumping in to challenge Bart as well. But then everyone just got confused. So I'll get to that in due course. I'm going to lay everything out for you guys first. At the beginning of the podcast, Rogan framed the whole discussion in what I thought was actually a really intelligent way by making reference to the context of the moon landing and everything else that has happened since.
I think today more people are aware of the insanely widespread deception that the government was involved in during the same time as the moon landing. I think this is important. We have to look at things realistically if we're ever going to get an accurate picture of how the world works. And I think if we look at the time that we're talking about, The Nixon administration, we talk about the Gulf of Tonkin incident where they got us into Vietnam. Operation Northwoods during the same time period. Operation Northwoods was a plan that was signed by the Joint Chiefs of Staff where they were going to initiate false flags to try to get us into a war with Cuba. There's the Kennedy assassination itself, which they still won't release the files. There's the moon landing. And the moon landing, and then there's Nixon, getting Nixon removed from the White House, which I didn't know was a giant government operation too.
Yeah, like I was saying, I agree with most of what Rogan was saying there. When you look at the moon landing in the context of the Cold War and everything the US government is known to have done since then, it really does raise questions about the moon landing given how important it was politically and how willing the government was to bend the rules to sway public opinion.
This one's the one that people hold on to the most because it's a source of national pride, and it is also like the accomplishments of NASA, the accomplishments of the scientific community, accomplishments of these people that are able to make things like the stealth bomber and all the wild shit that we know that is absolutely real, the space shuttle, SpaceX, all of the amazing engineers and scientists. What I want people to do is to say, what did they tell the truth about? If this is the one thing that you're willing to hang your hat on, you say, I know they lied about everything. They lied about everything. What did they tell the truth about? What did they They said, you know what? I know we're liars and we get people killed and we're, funneling money here and there. But what? We can't lie about the moon landing, guys. And everybody agreed.
So then, after setting the stage, Bart got straight into it with his theories and evidence of a moon landing hoax, starting with a basic comparison of technology from the 60s versus the technology available to us now.
So the number one proof that we have is simply deductive reasoning, because today, with 54-year better rocket designs and computer designs, the farthest that NASA can send a rocket with an astronaut into space is 1,000th the distance to the moon. That's why they're sending mannequins to orbit the moon that can't even land because they would die from the radiation.
If you're wondering what he's talking about here, basically there are these radiation belts in the inner region of Earth's magnetic field, which were discovered in '58 by astrophysicist James Van Allen, which are now referred to as the Van Allen belts. He was the one that figured out that it was actually possible to get through these belts and land on the moon by flying through the weaker regions of radiation and get through unharmed. Otherwise, the radiation would be too strong for a human to survive. I'll pick this up later when Rogan challenges Bart, but for now, let's get back to his hoax argument.
So what they're really claiming is, back in 1969, ahead of schedule on the first attempt, when all of NASA's computers had 1/1,000th the computing power of a cell phone, they sent astronauts 1,000 times farther into space than they can send today with 54-year better technology.
Okay, so that's the surface level technological argument about why the moon landing was possible 50 years ago. If we haven't been back since the 70s, what makes you think we were ever there in the first place? Like he said, we have more computing power now in a smartphone than they did on the Apollo missions. But then there's the fake video and fake photograph arguments. This is where it really gets interesting because this is a direct argument that the government conspired to fake the moon landing by staging it all in a film studio with lights, cameras, and 3D models.
So they're saying they're 130,000 miles away. So they're in deep space.
So that proves it's the window. You see that?
Right.
That's
so
an
now there's
astronaut.
people standing in front of we used to think that we're looking out into space at the Earth, but now we realize there's people standing in front of it. So there's other stuff going on. So something there's you're filming a room, and then
That's
whatever,
really the window.
Right.
That's
It's
arm
a window.
job.
Okay. Do you think that is just a piece of the Earth in a circular window?
Well, I
or
mean-
do you think they put something over the window to represent the Earth?
Another photographer believes it's like a transparency of. There's the circular
Let's
window.
let this play out.
Yeah.
Let this play out. So if
So
people
that's
see
the
it,
window. The point is, it's the window. It's
back it up a little
They're
bit.
using
Jamie.
the window to create a 1-foot model of the Earth.
I'll come back to this later on when Rogan pushes back and steelmans the counter-argument, but there have been a couple of things that have fueled this theory that I think are really interesting. I don't know if you've heard of the famous film director called Stanley Kubrick. He didn't make a whole bunch of films, but he's widely credited as being one of the best filmmakers of all time. He made movies like Spartacus, Dr. Strangelove, A Clockwork Orange, Full Metal Jacket, and Eyes Wide Shut, which was his last movie. But probably his most famous movie was 2001: A Space Odyssey, which was released just over a year before the Apollo 11 moon landing way back in 1968. Now, you might not realize it now, but Space Odyssey was groundbreaking cinema at the time, and it's widely considered to be one of the best movies ever. One of the reasons why was the striking realism and futurism of the spacecrafts, as well as the depictions of the planets and space travel in general. In case you can't tell, I used to have an unhealthy obsession with Kubrick, so I probably know a little bit too much about all this, so I'll try and be brief here. Because 2001 came out around a year before the moon landing, like I said, it was like nothing people had ever seen before. It led people to speculate that Kubrick was the one who staged the moon landing in a studio for the government. But not only that, when he was filming the movie, after he was finished with the actors, he spent another year filming the special effects in the studio, which sparked a lot of gossip about what he was actually doing in there. So that's where some of the speculation came from regarding his involvement in the moon landing hoax. But of course, it gets worse. After this theory got traction, people started looking for clues in his other movies. Now, if you've seen any of his films, you'll know how much he plays with visual motifs and themes, and one of them in particular was the number of the hotel room in The Shining, room 237. Some people believe that this number represented the average distance from Earth to the moon, being around 237,000 miles, which isn't exactly accurate, but it's close enough. He also retrofitted some of the photographic lenses that Zeiss had designed for NASA to be used on the Apollo 11 mission for his movie Barry Lyndon. Those particular lenses had groundbreaking low light capabilities, which Kubrick used to light scenes using only candlelight. So, I thought I'd just give you that background on where that conspiracy came from. You can see how it slowly developed out of the movie 2001 and ended up evolving into a valid theory to this day. There's so much more I didn't mention. For example, Kubrick's political views in movies like Dr. Strangelove and Full Metal Jacket. But for now, let's get back to Bart Sibrel's evidence of a hoax.
Let's go over some other stuff. One thing I wanted to go over is the photographs and the shadows that are moving at different angles.
You'll see on the left-hand side is sunlight. Try it yourself.
Right.
Go out in your front yard or your parking lot at work on a cloudless day. 2 people, 2 telephone poles, 2 trees. They will always run parallel. They will never intersect. It's impossible for sunlight shadows to intersect. Over here on the right, the astronaut shadow is going at 12 o'clock, and a rock 5 feet away, the shadow's going at 9 o'clock. A 90-degree intersection proving that that was taken with an electrical light that's really close, and it's probably behind the astronaut, and if you go to the right of it, it's going to throw the angle off. That proves it in a court of law.
Yeah, I don't know if that's a very strong legal argument, but you can see how the shadow coming off the rock doesn't seem to fit with the astronaut's shadow. Jamie offers several different explanations for it, which I'll show you in a moment. But just to finish off Bart's arguments and get to Rogan's steelmanning, let's see what he had to add to the radiation argument.
Let me add one thing about the radiation. So I called up NASA. I said, I'm a journalist. You sent up 2 Geiger counters on a civilian mission to specifically measure the radiation in the radiation belt, which they should have had 50 years ago anyway.
Right.
And then I said, can I please have those radiation readings? They said it's a classified military secret. I said, temperature of the sun isn't a military secret. When you sent probes to Jupiter to find out how much helium is in Jupiter's atmosphere, the amount of helium isn't a military secret. So why would the amount of radiation surrounding the Earth and the radiation belt that most people don't know about, why would that amount of radiation be a secret? Because if they reveal it, it would prove that they couldn't go through it to the moon.
Okay, so I want to make a couple of comments before I show you Rogan's pushback on all of these theories. Probably the biggest thing I noticed about Bart is that he does the exact same thing that guys like Tucker Carlson and Graham Hancock do, as well as most of the non-expert, highly opinionated guests that Rogan has on the podcast. They'll use a legitimate observation that raises a question and then declare that it's irrefutable proof of a conspiracy theory or alternative theory, contrarian theory, whatever you want to call it. Now, I'll give you my personal opinion on the moon landing hoax at the end, but this is what started to annoy and frustrate Rogan during this debate. Bart would make a valid observation and then follow it up straight away with, therefore the whole moon landing was a complete hoax.
So what they're really claiming is they had 1,000 times better technology in 1969 than they do today.
Not necessarily.
Well, but that is because you can't have better technology in the past and in the future.
Right,
That's impossible.
But they haven't done a moon landing program today.
So it would
Computing
take, it
power
would
of
take
your
less
phone.
time. It would take less time to return to the moon.
If they
but
did.
it's taking more
But
time
they're
instead
not
of less
doing
time.
right, but they're not doing it, right? Like during the
Because
Apollo
they can't do it.
Okay, that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
And I'm with you. But the Apollo program doesn't exist today. The Apollo program was a massive program to try to beat Russia to get the first person on the moon. And it was a concerted effort by how many scientists? How many people were involved? How many employees?
Well, a couple 100,000.
Okay. That's a lot of people to organize and to focus on one very specific goal. That's not happening today. So to say that we can't do it today, it's like people would say, if I was steel manning their position, I would say, no, we're not trying to do it today. If we wanted to do it today, we could do it today.
Well, actually, they are
400,000, it says. Here's the argument against that it would be fake. Everyone would know, and everyone would tell, and it would get out.
So there's a couple of things going on there, and like I said at the beginning of this video, in my opinion, Rogan did a pretty decent job of pushing back on Bart's talking points. On the one hand, we haven't been back to the moon since the 70s, but on the other hand, we're living in a very different political climate now, and we don't necessarily have a reason to relaunch the Apollo missions. But the idea that it would be too difficult to coordinate a conspiracy is something that really resonates with me. You've probably heard people say this about the 9/11 attacks, how it would have been far too hard to coordinate several agencies and thousands of people into staging it as a false flag attack to invade the Middle East and remove Saddam Hussein, etc. However, the difference here that Bart actually pointed out is that almost all of those 400,000 staff and personnel were off-site. So, it would have only required a dozen or so conspirators, including Stanley Kubrick, the film crew, the astronauts, and a few suits, to coordinate this hoax, not to mention smartphone and social media didn't exist, so it would have been easier to get away with it back then compared to now. I still think it's a stretch to assume that all of those engineers and scientists working on the project didn't notice that it wasn't possible. I mean, they were the brains behind everything, right? Anyway, after Bart got into the whole shadows argument, Rogan pulled him up yet again for jumping to false conclusions based on flaky, almost circumstantial evidence.
Like I said, shadows intersecting at 90 degrees, which you can't duplicate in sunlight, which means it's electrical light, which means they didn't go to the moon. All this proof. The footage we uncovered.
Let me stop you there. That doesn't mean they didn't go to the moon. That means that photograph is faked.
Okay. Well,
Right.
why would the pictures be fake if they really went? But
well,
in any
you
case,
you could make the argument that the radiation damaged the cameras and they weren't able to get real photographs, and so they made a conscious decision to use fake photographs. I think they had a lot more hubris back then. They faked a lot of photographs back then. It was pretty common. Or publicity firms that worked for NASA had a limited amount of photos to work with, and they decided to manipulate some so that they could have photos that they didn't have of an actual event which really took place.
So this is where I think there's some common ground between people who believe the moon landing was a hoax and people who are unsure but are still very skeptical of government. You don't have to stretch your imagination to believe that the US government chose to fill in the gaps by staging some video and photography in a studio, instead of just being transparent with the public and telling everyone that they lost a whole bunch of footage due to radiation damage or simply just human error. It's like that old saying, sometimes the cover-up is worse than the crime. So I personally have no issue believing that the government was capable and willing of making that decision, instead of being open and honest about what really happened.
Here's what I would say if I was trying to counter what you're saying. All right, the Earth at 130,000 miles out is halfway to the moon. The moon is 1/4 the size of Earth. The moon, on a full moon, is fairly bright. I mean, you could walk around outside in the dark. Imagine that 4 times greater and twice as close. So the Earth, which has blue reflective light because of the oceans, and it's glorious. It glows in the sky. you would imagine that if you were filming Earth from 130,000 miles out, you would have to blacken the insides of the walls, and you probably couldn't get the camera any closer to that window. I mean, it probably doesn't even fit any closer than that with all the instrumentation. If you were filming it specifically to try to get an image of the Earth and what it looked like at 130,000 miles out, would it even look that small? I don't think it would. It would probably look a lot larger. So if they're shooting it through this window and the light is probably pretty intense, it might be the only way to film the Earth with the kind of cameras that they had back then would be to do it that way.
If they were halfway to the moon and the Earth was at the window, the Earth would be a tiny dot.
It wouldn't be that
out
small.
That window.
No, but it wouldn't. But stop. It wouldn't be that small because the moon's not that small. You got to think about how big the moon is. The moon is a big ass thing, right?
So let me ask you this, Joe. Do you think the moon landings are real or not?
I'm not saying that. What
okay,
I'm
but
saying
wait
to
a minute.
you,
I just want to know what you think. What do you think?
I'm going to go at this. And I'm just going to try to ask the most logical questions to refute what you're saying without giving an opinion. I'll give you an opinion eventually.
So clearly, Rogan sits on the fence with this one, which I tend to agree with if I'm being honest. Even if you accept that the government obviously faked, produced, edited, whatever you want to call it, that's still not concrete proof that the whole moon landing was a hoax. All that proves is that the government created its own videos and photos for public consumption to support their massive space program. And the thing is, most of the arguments that Bart put forward have already been debunked by actual scientists over the years, so it kind of feels a little bit silly for Rogan to have Bart on there without getting someone who can actually explain why he's completely wrong sitting right next to him. He needs to find the Flint Dibble of astrophysics to get him on to debate Bart. Granted, Rogan did ask him to come back on to debate a real scientist, to which he agreed, so we'll hold out for that, but I think that Rogan realized about halfway through that he should have done that in the first place and started to regret doing it on his own. It ended up just turning into a confused shambles. Jamie started piping up and challenging Bart, and Rogan was stuck in the middle.
Right?
Well, if I...
I was trying to understand. So it's not that they're 130,000 miles out, but it's that they're in space faking the shot?
Yes, they're in Earth
doing
orbit.
it. They're
So they went to
faking being
space.
halfway
Which
to
is
the
why
moon
it's
from
so
Earth orbit.
bright. The reason why it's so bright is because they're just like the space station.
That doesn't, I don't know. I'm getting more confused on all of these pieces because I thought that they didn't even go to space.
No. Nobody thinks that. Nobody thinks
They
that.
did go to
Jamie,
space.
you need to catch the up on
Bro.
Reddit.
Well, look. So we've concluded.
Yes.
They are faking being halfway to the moon.
No. That's not what we concluded. We concluded that they are faking that the blackness around that image of the Earth is space. That's all we're confirming.
That's why I'm confused.
But hold
too.
on, Jamie. Hold on, Jamie. So we're confirming that blackness, which is clearly the inside of the cockpit, right? Clearly. If they're saying that blackness is space and that circular image is the Earth, looking at the Earth through space, that's clearly deception. When you're talking about camera equipment, if you take camera equipment, the old school film, and you run it through old school radar detectors at the airport, those metal detectors, it fucks up your camera equipment.
It wasn't difficult for them to go to the moon. They went 6 times in.
I know, but listen to
3
me.
years. They
But
drove
listen to me.
cars on the moon,
But that's not
played
what I'm
golf
saying.
on the moon.
But that's what I'm saying.
And yet, for some reason, today they can only send mannequins to orbit the moon.
Well, listen, we're in agreement on this. This is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, what you could say is that the real maybe they went and they faked the footage, and the reason they faked the footage because the footage got all fucked up because they went through radiation. Yeah, it's
All right.
But
I'm
no,
gonna stop. I'm
but
gonna
no, but hold on, Jamie, don't stop.
But you guys are fighting against the things that I'm saying as a photographer, as a filmmaker, and like.
We're not fighting
but you're
against
assuming
anything.
you're assuming it's sunlight. How do
I
you-
said it could be 4 different lights. It also could be the reflector of the actual lunar lander. That thing is made of giant shiny metal that has also light reflecting in multiple ways.
Where's the lunar lander
Probably
though in
behind
relation?
him.
Maybe
We don't. That's
we
what,
don't
that's
know,
what I'm
but
saying.
that's part
I
of
don't
the
know
problem.
where all the light sources are. I wasn't there.
That has to be the most emotional I've ever heard young Jamie. It reminded me of the time Steven Crowder was on the podcast and him and Rogan ganged up on Crowder over the weed talk. That one was a classic, but like I said at the beginning of this video, I was kind of disappointed at the end of this. Rogan really needs to be more proactive in booking guests so he can have 2 or even 3 people debating who actually know what they're talking about. Having said that, I do think Rogan did a pretty good job in this one. It's obviously something he's spoken about quite a bit on the podcast, and I don't think there's any real harm in having these conversations. As for Bart Sabrell, he came off as a bit of a grifter. He plugged his website at every opportunity. He even used it as a way of deflecting Rogan's questions. He'd get stuck and just say, oh, go and check out my website. All the evidence is there. And when you go onto his website, it's obvious that he's just trying to sell shit. And did I mention he's not actually a scientist? Yeah, classic JRE. Anyway, that's it from me, guys. I hope you enjoyed this breakdown. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and don't forget to check out my Patreon as well. There's a couple of videos there already and much more to come, so don't miss out on those. And if you're not a regular of this channel, hit the subscribe button, and don't forget to give me a thumbs up if you ended up enjoying this video. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.
And again, what year was this?
That was 1999.
I'm gonna sneeze. Sorry, allergies.
Yes. Truth, you're allergic to truth?
No, I'm
Okay.
allergic to whatever's in the air in Austin.